Welcome back to the Slice Tennis Podcast. We're here once again after the last Grand Slam of the year, the U.S. Open. Champions have been crowned. Unfortunately, the Americans went down, but we have an absolutely amazing episode for you guys today. Later on, maybe around the 20-ish minute mark, we have the president of the PTPA, Ahmad, coming on. He's one of the boys. Clearly, it was a great conversation. But
he just got roasted by Andy Roddick, and we're getting first impressions here on a podcast before he goes on the other podcast that we won't name.
Let's go, the unnamed show. But yes, and so today this show will look a little bit different. We're gonna break down the U.S. Open a little bit, then we'll get into the interview, then we'll hit our smash or pass. But before we do all that, we gotta shout out Betway, the best sponsor out there, and we got to talk about the best bets. Look, the best place to bet is Betway. You got to be 19 and up to play, and it's in collaboration with iGaming Ontario. Always, we cannot stress this enough. Always play responsibly. One way to play responsibly, more times than not, is to follow, subscribe to the Slice, and look for the videos that Steven has titled, "This is why blank will win this tournament." Because more times than not, I believe the stat was 84%. He's right.
Great point. And, obviously the topic of everyone knows who's won. Jannik Sinner defeated Taylor Fritz in the men's final. I made a video before it saying why Jannik Sinner will beat Taylor Fritz, and essentially exactly what we said happened. So that could be like, how there's like stock predictors, JP, of like the Nancy Pelosi stock tracker. Like it just picks whatever pick she gets.
Account, by the way.
She has insider trading information. I'm not saying I have insider. There's no inside information to have, but it's essentially the closest thing you could get is following the Slice, doing what we say with picks, not financial advice. But I think it's now I picked 9 out of 11 correctly and some of these are not like I will say, let's just go through them quickly. JP, this is our genuine betting talk here. Like some of them are layups, and I'll say for sure, maybe in my opinion, Sinner beating Fritz was a pretty safe one. I felt pretty safe about that. I was like, I can hang my hat on it. But I'll just put out some of these that were not safe, and I'll show you. So I picked some of them. Yeah. Anyways, I picked Sinner to beat Djokovic in Australia this year.
Mm-hmm.
I will say that was not that safe. Sinner had never beaten Djokovic at a major, and it's freaking Djokovic at the Australian Open. He's literally won it, I think, 12 times at this point. So that was not that safe. I picked, and then I will admit a lot of them are actually pretty safe. But I picked Alcaraz. I picked Alcaraz over Djokovic this year as well at the Australian Open. So maybe I've just been riding the wave of Djokovic getting older. But again,
I would like to highlight one thing.
Yes.
2 things actually. What were your 2 misses? Who did you bet wrong on?
People are gonna say, I'm not gonna say that this is the reason why some people speculate unfairly that I don't like Djokovic, but I've picked Djokovic to win 4 of these matches. Let's just say that, and he's let me down twice, so 50%. I picked him to beat Nadal at the 2022 quarterfinal of Roland Garros, which I thought was actually pretty safe. And then Rafa came out of nowhere and just kind of smoked him. And then not came out of nowhere. He's won it 14 times, but he was he was not feeling well that year, I believe.
Right.
Or at that time in that year, although he had won the Australian Open earlier that year. And then I picked Djokovic to beat Alcaraz last year at Wimbledon. And obviously Alcaraz won. So Djokovic he's the only player to have let me down, which is crazy if you think about it.
Insane spin zone there, but
yeah, for sure. So anyways, shout out to Betway for supporting the Slice and being a reason why we can be here delivering the Slice to you, JP. And the big topic I want to hear your thoughts on this, JP, because the folks listening have already got my thoughts on this. Jannik Sinner chicken dinner, winning the freaking US Open. I would say confirming that he's absolutely the best hardcore player in the world, and literally doing it in the face of all the haters from the doping scandal. What were your thoughts on Sinner at the U.S. Open, JP?
It hurt. It hurt bad because every single time you turn on that TV, they show the same graphic. No American has made it to the final, has won since 2006, has made it to the final since 2006. Andy Roddick, they show him every single match. Francis Tiafoe, Taylor Swift, we're guaranteed. Taylor Fritz, we're guaranteed an American to be in the final. That was the number one issue right there. We were celebrating. That's not how America was built. We were not built on celebrating a small win of making it to a final.
But that's what it's come to in America, in American
No.
tennis, is celebrating the
No, it
final,
hasn't.
and I feel like they set Fritz up for disaster, which it was.
No, it hasn't. That's not what it's come to, because that's not how I feel, and I'm an American with American spirit.
You speak for American tennis. So are you happy then about second places for men and women?
No, if I was Taylor Fritz, I'm leaving the trophy there. I'm like, look, man, what would you want me to do with this platter? I'm coming back next year and I'm winning it. I'm just kidding. I would take the trophy, but I would be upset. But like you're saying, I mean, it has to all but confirm that Sinner is probably the best hardcore player right now, even though maybe a peaking Francis Tiafoe that doesn't get out of shape in the fifth set versus Fritz could put up a little bit of a better match against him. I don't know. But Sinner showed his stuff against Fritz. Anytime I'm watching the match when Sinner got his break back on Fritz, and then when Fritz broke him in the third set, and then Sinner got him again, and it was just like, oh my God, there's nothing you can do. The way he covered the court, he's like never off balance for a shot.
Yeah.
When it looks like he's playing defense, all of a sudden he's hitting some insane like cross court winner. And I can imagine how frustrating it would be to play him. But
yeah, and I don't think I talked about this enough on the instant reaction to the final. Was like, I think Jannik Sinner really exposed Taylor Fritz's movement in that match. Like, you could kind of see they're similar build guys,
right?
Both big dudes, both can hit it really hard, and Sinner is just a lot better mover than Fritz is. And so you would kind of see like Fritz, when he did get those breaks, he was playing really big, but you kind of, like, we call that redlining, where it's like you can't keep that up. You could kind of see you would get that break, but you couldn't keep that level of play up. And it's probably harder to do when you're just like uncomfortable moving on to these shots that you have to be able to do. Like, why has Djokovic been so dominant on the hard court? Because he can like move into those corners, hit those shots, and then like it's not a big deal for him. And Sinner's like always moved a bit like Djokovic in that way, and he's now just gotten stronger. I was super just impressed with Sinner's poise throughout this whole event, and I hope his team just helped him shut out kind of the noise, because for whatever reason on like on Twitter, all I see is like, it's either like people just portraying like, oh, Sinner won. They're like, it's like the US Open account saying like Sinner's the winner, and then it says everyone else is just like, he's a doper, he's a cheater, like he sucks, like I can't believe like all this story. It's just like literally all, and that's not everyone. Like the vocal minority gets pushed to the front on Twitter, on a place like Twitter, but I'm sure he was able to, through that whole stressful time, come out, find his best tennis, and win the tournament when Alcaraz and Djokovic went out. And I thought it might be a question. I wonder if you thought about this. Like, now he has, once they went out in the second rounds, the kind of the tournament seemed a little bit like his to lose. So like, would that get to his head? And he didn't. He stepped up. He beat Medvedev. He beat Tommy Paul. He beat Taylor Fritz. Like, he beat everyone that asked the question.
We learned a lot about him, the mental side of things for sure. Because there would have been every excuse for him to have a slip up, and he was just locked in. And it's crazy because it never really looked like he was reacting on the court. It was like he was the one always in control, even when he wasn't in control. Which is
for sure. And that's the sickening part about it. I'm sure if you're a guy like Taylor Fritz playing him, it's the same way that people have felt against Djokovic or Alcaraz. You're like, oh man, this rally's going really well. I'm like moving this guy like crazy. Okay, should be finishing the point here soon. And then they're just all of a sudden back on offense from this crazy defensive shot where you just hit one shot that maybe wasn't perfect. You're like, what is this? This normally doesn't play out this way. because I'm a good player, and then like they must just mind trick these opponents. And it brings me back, JP, to our question on the last podcast, which was, you know, the belief in like the rest of the tour, because this was before Zverev had lost. This was
Right.
earlier in the, I guess this was halfway through the tournament. We're like, there's going to be new belief in the tour of all these other players like Fritz and Tommy. You know, why not me? But I'm wondering now that Sinner won this tournament, he's now won 2 in the year, and now you're thinking, okay, well, is it just going to be another big 3 and then like a big 2 of Alcaraz and Sinner? Like, will that belief even get there? Because you know, I think there would have been way more belief if Fritz had won, obviously, because they would have been like, oh, okay.
It's because I forget who I was talking about this with, but because we were speaking about that same thing of, man, maybe these Alcaraz and Sinner like will break everybody's mind and they won't think they can win. But I would say there's still something about Sinner that like, and maybe it's just because he's young and he could gain it in the next 2 to 3 years or whatever. But like Nadal, Federer, Djokovic, and this word is used way too much now, but they like all have an aura about them. And Sinner, to me, like they have that like superstar aura.
Yeah.
And I just like don't feel like Sinner has that natural thing where he steps on and you're like, man, I'm in for it. Where I think it happens when they're playing, obviously, and he's dominating these people, but there's levels to the game, and I don't know if he has that type of like vibe to him yet.
There's levels to the game, but I will say, like, I think 2 majors puts you on that level. So the next major, when it comes around, they're like, dang, this guy's won 2 of the last 4 majors. He currently holds 2 of them. So anyone who's playing him at the Australian Open is going to feel sick when they come on the court, I think.
Yeah, you don't want to play him.
I don't know if you remember it, against Jack Draper in the semifinal, he like fell on his ass like during the middle of a point. Like he like it was like a weird, like it was like comic book. He like tripped and like bounced backwards.
Yeah.
And then got up, and Jack Draper put it to him, and he just literally smashed the ball like a passing shot that was so hard that Jack didn't like reach for it.
Right.
I feel like those are the kind of things like people don't realize how big Sinner is. You see this lanky guy, like, oh, maybe he can't move, but he moves, he hits it, and I think his aura is going to start coming. Like Alcaraz has it,
right?
But I think, you know, going from a 1 slam wonder potentially to now multiple slam champion, he's put himself into another category of player where there's like way less players who have won 2 majors than there are who have won 1, I'm sure. And then, you know, he's definitely not stopping there. So I think once he gets more majors and he's continuing to be number 1, that aura is going to increase. But I do love that celebration that where he just like puts his head down and like doesn't do anything. He just like hits a shot and like puts his head down. He's like, it is kind of, he's like the silent killer, like, you know, and where, you know, there's everyone else is talking. He just wins the US Open, doesn't even fall on his back or do anything. I love that, by the way. Like routine a guy 3 sets in the final. It's just like, thank you very much. Go kiss your girlfriend.
Which, by the way, that kiss.
No tears. What did you think about the kiss?
We want to talk about aura. That's 0 aura.
What did you want him to do? Make out with her?
He didn't even look like he wanted to kiss her.
That's gangster.
No. I think that's
Italian. That's the Italian. That's the Godfather right there.
Nah, okay. Hey, Sinner ain't the Godfather.
He just said, "Hey, I'm handling my bit. I got to kiss. I can't not kiss you because it's on TV, but you know, I'm handling my business. Don't ask me about my affairs." Do you remember that line? Don't ask me about my affairs. Yeah, he's cold, man. I'm telling you, Sinner's aura is gonna grow because he is ice cold on the court. I bet you it takes him like a couple hours to cool down after that. I'm sure he's way more loving with Anna after.
Oh yeah.
But
and he does. He's a young, like kind of more shy guy.
I'm like, you know, I can't believe you think he didn't want to kiss her. It's just, I think it's just like, it's also kind of awkward. Like literally millions of people are watching. You're not gonna like. I don't know. Maybe he's just not a passionate guy. Maybe
he might not be, but we're gonna need some more swag somewhere in the bag.
Okay, well, the Italians are gonna come for you, JP. They somehow get from me that I don't like Sinner, even when I'm like, I'm just objectively saying what's going on. I'm like, yeah, he beat Medvedev, and Medvedev played like trash. I'm like, they're like, you hate Sinner. I'm like, no, 2 things can be true at the same time. I don't hate Sinner, and Medvedev played one of the worst matches he's played against in a big match in a long time.
Yeah. I think what Sinner needs is like he'll need to win I mean, he's so young. Whenever he gets his like a 5-set Grand Slam win, like it in the final, I feel
Yeah.
like he'll be like the aura will be solidified.
Oh, like you mean in the Australian Open when he won in 5 sets against Medvedev in the final?
Nah, but you know what I mean.
I know what you mean. That was one of those matches, and so the Fritz match was definitely not epic, and even the
Right.
Medvedev one, it wasn't epic. Like literally, Medvedev won the first 2 sets, and then you could physically
Just
see him
died.
decline, and then it was just over. Like everyone
Yeah.
kind of knew it was over. So yeah, I know what you mean. One of those matches that like
Right.
honestly, and I think it could, and even when he beat Djokovic, it was like Djokovic you could tell played like trash. When
Yeah.
Alcaraz beat Djokovic in the Wimbledon final last year in that 5-set epic where it could have like Djokovic could have easily
Exactly.
won that. That's where people are like, "Oh, this guy's built different." He
Right.
just beat a good Djokovic. So yeah, I think I know what you mean. And honestly, that when that aura is going to come, it's not going to come against Djokovic. I don't think.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I think it's going to come against Alcaraz in like a final where
Which
he
will be
beats
so
him straight
epic.
up, and Alcaraz plays well. I think it's going to have to be at like a hard court because for me right now with the clay and with the grass, Alcaraz is so nice on those surfaces. But yeah, I know what you mean about that for sure.
Yeah. Hey,
Okay,
somebody
so
that does have aura, Sabalenka.
you see her in the red dress afterwards, like,
Bro.
I'm not a fashionista, but people were going crazy about her kind of aura that she was giving after winning the trophy, walking around with the red dress and the trophy, kind of just rocking it.
I love her,
She's got
man.
aura.
She's so fun. And she's one of those players that I really don't understand how she could have haters.
Oh, for sure.
It's a bummer. And I saw Sabalenka's tweet this earlier today. She said, "Let the party begin. I know. Don't worry, guys. I'll be back practicing in a few days. But for now," and then she put the dancing emoji with like the laughing emoji with like the sweat drop coming down. I was like,
Yeah.
she is too good, man. You love to see somebody like that succeed.
Yeah, she just seems very relatable, like, likes to have a good time, gets pissed on court when she's not playing. Love to see that as
Yeah.
well. To be honest, I've always loved Federer, but I can't relate to him in any way, like literally
Right.
any way. Because like he didn't get mad on court and he was good at tennis, like, good
He's not one
looking,
of
like
us.
not swag. All these things I can't relate to. But I can relate to Arena other than she would kill me at tennis. Like she would kill me
One-handed
so bad.
backhand, you and Federer.
Yeah, but
Y'all have that in common.
mine looks like Federer if he got in a car accident and was still drunk. That's what mine looks like compared to him. But yeah, Arena Sabalenka, massive. Just quick stats on her win there. That's her third major. All three of them have been on hard courts, 2 at the Australian Open, 1 at the US Open. I think she's clearly, in my opinion, the best hard court player on the WTA, better than Swiatek for sure. So yeah, that's
I
big.
saw her, thought this was maybe a little bit of a little detail thrown in there to skew it, but it was still impressive. I don't know how they would attract it, but they said velocity on her forehand, like top spin shots, was the highest of
Yeah.
the men and the women. Highest average speed.
Yeah, I saw that, and that's true. And it actually doesn't surprise me, but what it proves is that she should be playing with the men.
Let's just set it up. Put her in the next one.
No, I'm joking. All real tennis fans know that. Like some people say that, and and like all the pro women are like, "You're an idiot for thinking that." Like, you
Literally just
serious?
run the Serena Williams clip.
Yeah, just run that. But no, like it's. I think some people, and for the newer tennis fans watching, like they won't understand that. They'll be like, "Wait, does Aryna Sabalenka actually hit it harder than like Jannik Sinner?"
Right.
And no, she doesn't. That's like a fact. The amount of spin that the male players use is so much more, and the variety of their shot. Like if you
Right.
go sit courtside at a men's thing, they're using like height and angles and slices, and they're like not going full out in each shot because that introduces a bunch of risk. But some of these players like Sabalenka can just repeatedly hit the same shot. So I think, and she can crush it. I'm sure she does I'm sure she has a bigger forehand straight up than a bunch of players on the ATP tour.
For sure.
But I think that just helps her average forehand, which is the average topspin, get higher because she's not like really she's not really taking anything off. She's literally just crushing opponents. Like go look at her scores. Like she's playing on the front foot, whether it's a
Right.
return or whatever, and she's just crushing balls all day long when she's on the court. So she's a G. All right.
Shoot
I think
some
on that
master
note, congrats to the winners of the Australian Open. Commiserations to the Americans like JP, who are going to have to wait at
We'll win it
least
next year.
4 months. I think you honestly have a better chance at like the Australian Open or Wimbledon or something like that. There's just too much
we make
pressure
that happen.
at the US Open. That would be sick. They wouldn't care. The USTA would take any win at this point for sure on the men's side. We're going to throw it to someone who has, is working with the USTA right now in his function as the executive director of the PTPA, Ahmad Nassar. Ahmad Nassar, sorry, joined the podcast today. We did a great interview with him. JP set it up. So let's throw it to that now.
We have a very, very special guest that we're stoked to have on. We have Ahmad Nassar, the president of the PTPA. He has a long resume. He's been involved with the NFLPA. He's also working on the track. I believe it's called the Grand Slam, right? You're a board member
Grand Slam
of that.
track. Yep.
And we have him on the slice. Steven, I'm excited. I know you're excited. So how about we just get right into it?
Well, yeah, Ahmad, it's great to have you on. The PTPA has been a huge topic of conversation at different times in the tennis world, and especially, in the last week with some of the vocal people at the U.S. Open commenting on your organization. So thanks for joining the Slice.
Thanks for having me. Looking forward to the conversation.
Right on. So I guess, firstly, just straight off the top, like I think, one of the questions that was raised by one of our fellow podcast producers here at the US Open was like, just from the top, some people, we're in tennis media. Andy Roddick, who we're obviously talking about, is in tennis media. So we're a bit more in the scenes, but just the casual tennis fan might not get all the press releases from the PTA. They might not, hear what players are saying. So they might really not know what's going on. So I guess in your perspective, since 2021, which is what I understand when it formally kind of got founded or moving, what would you say the main difference is that the PTPA has made in the tennis world for the players?
Well, first, and I'll get to that, and I'm happy to get to that. And I'm happy that we're having the conversation and people are asking the question. We're just finishing the U.S. Open, as you mentioned. And there's that great Billie Jean King quote that pressure is a privilege, right? Before people walk out onto ash. And I think questions like this and expectations of an organization and like even the whole premise of like, well, what have you guys done? It implies rightfully so that, well, it should be something, right? And if you go back to 2020, 2021, when the player leaders formed the PTPA, that wasn't a given at all. In fact, it was, why do we need this? Let's kill this thing, get rid of this thing. Why do we have this? And so I think it's important to start with why the players, and I didn't get involved until 2022, right? I've worked in sports and at players associations, taught law at Georgetown, sports law, at Georgetown, talking about unionization and all these efforts since 2008, 2009. But I haven't worked in tennis until 2022. And tennis is different, right? And the structures around it, you guys know this probably better than me, and you've been around it longer than I have. But the players needed and wanted to create an independent voice, first and foremost, because and remember, we have 8 executive committee members, 4 men, 4 women, and half of them, 3 of the men and 1 of the women, served on their player councils at the ATP and the WTA, and those are, we often shorthand that phrase to player council. If you look in the bylaws, it's the Player Advisory Council. And what they realize is the key word is not player and it's not council, it's advisory, okay? And they got sick of sitting around in these rooms and having these discussions and thinking that they would get to make decisions and realizing, oh, wait a minute, we don't get to make the decisions, right? And we're not independent. And then even the board members that we have, representatives who we have who sit at these respective organizations, they actually are board members of the organization, not of the players, right? And so that's just different. There's nothing wrong with that, but it's different. And so this whole thing was born out of, hey, the players are not adequately represented. There's not an independent voice. And let's do, and you're going to hear me talk about this a lot in general, which is, what do other sports have? I understand that many of the other sports are team sports and not individual sports. I understand that they might be different and structured differently and look different. But at the end of the day, we all have fans. We all have consumers who pay the bills. We all have structures and anti-doping. We want fair games. We want to be on TV and easily found, I think, on TV. And we want to grow the sport, right? I mean, what was the thing that was on camera more than anything this last 2 weeks of the US Open? It was world's healthiest sport, right? And I got a lot of questions about that from different people. What does that mean and why and all that? And what about mental health? But the reality is we're all trying to figure out some of the same things. And what the players came to me, and the reason I got connected to them in the first place was I had experience with the NFL Players Association, MLB Players Association, WNBA Players Association, even the NBA Players Association. And, you know, Novak and some of the other players asked, how does something like that work for everybody from LeBron James, right, that everybody knows, to the 12th man on the roster of any specific NBA team? And what issues, there's a lot of issues that are different for different players, and tennis is certainly like that. But what issues can we find common ground on? So now, Stephen, getting to the answer to your question, building these services, and this is exactly what we laid out 2 years ago, right? There's no like we took a U-turn or we took a detour. What we said 2 years ago at the US Open was we're rebooting the PTPA, we're doubling down, we're hiring the staff, we got funding to put together a real players association in the mold of all the other ones that I just rattled off. And what we got to start by doing is delivering value to the players. Value in the form of services, value in the form of benefits, value in the form of increased commercial opportunities, things filling gaps that weren't being addressed. So drug anti-doping appeals, right? And helping navigate what is a Kafka-esque process for most players, right? How do you navigate that? We've had some ability there to help players like Tara Moore, who had won her appeal, but it took way too long. And so there's still a lot more work to do there, but we have a process there, and we're able to connect players with lawyers. We're able to help get discounted rates and even in some cases pay for some of those legal bills. Again, ideally in the future, we've got full-time lawyers, just like those other players associations, at least the big ones have, on staff. And we're able to directly represent players who might not otherwise be able to afford independent legal counsel and figure out that system all on their own, right? The tours do not really help them do that. And it's not the tour's job, to be honest with you, right? So that's one example. Another example is our medical director. And we just put out some statistics that he put together that say, for example, that night matches are 22% more likely to lead to injuries, right? And so now this isn't just a complaint about a late night and 2 a.m. or 3 a.m. or even 4 a.m. in some instances. And what about the players and what that means on the turnaround time? And it's not theoretical, man, this doesn't seem like the best setup for a sport. It's actually hard data saying players are 22%. So now you put that on top of everything else. We really ought to do something to change that, right? And again, when you talk about creating an independent voice, which is what the PTPA is, to what end? What are we trying to do? Well, we're trying to call attention to some of these shortcomings. And at the end of the day, the goal is not just to benefit the players in isolation. It's to grow the sport for everybody. Yes, we're player-centric, but we're not only about the players. And some of these things, late night matches, having a clear anti-doping process, fine appeals. We've seen wild variations in fines for things like smashing rackets or hitting balls into the stands, right? I live not far from DC. We saw what happened, right, to a Canadian player at the City Open. And so and that looked a lot different a few weeks later at a different tournament when a player, kind of rocket launched a ball. And so we just, this is what we're trying to standardize and provide players, having a medical director who's interested in the data, not interested in getting them back out there, patching them up, not interested in protecting the status quo. That's a real change. And this is a guy who works with everybody from the Minnesota Vikings and the New York Yankees. He's a real guy, right? He's advised presidential administrations on sports and health and nutrition. These are real people, right? People that we've hired come from other areas that, people came out of big consulting firms, big tech firms. I brought a bunch of people from other players associations who have had similar experiences to me to now work in tennis and benefit the tennis players. And then at the same time, we've, separate from services and benefits, some of which I've outlined right now, but then we've also, and you may have covered this on other episodes, but, there's this discussion at kind of the highest level of tennis about what does the tour look like, right? Beyond the 4 Grand Slams. And you've heard probably phrases like the premium tour and merger and so again, providing the players with an independent voice in those discussions. We have a direct line, regular meetings interactions with the 4 Grand Slams, the Grand Slam board, both of the tours, and making a lot of the same points. We can't unilaterally, and neither can they, do any of this, right? And so you kind of, on the stuff that we can control ourselves, rolling out services and benefits, again, it takes a while to get a Hilton deal, takes a while to get a trading card deal, but those are things that we largely can push ourselves, and we have, right?
Mhm.
And then the things that require a lot of buy-in from tournaments, big, small, medium, from tours, men and women, from 4 different Grand Slams in 4 different countries. Well, it's no shock that that stuff takes longer. But I think over the last year, we've seen a very different tone and tenor to those conversations. We haven't seen the progress and the results that we want. But if you compare the last year and those discussions to the last 10 years before that, I would argue, and I'm not taking credit for this by any stretch, but I would argue we've seen a lot different level of discussion around reforming tennis at the highest level.
Very cool yeah. So it sounds like, one of the biggest, if you're just looking at the history of tennis, one of the biggest accomplishments the PTPA has made in the last few years, which was the question, is kind of like existing, like standing up where there hasn't been a voice for the players, an independent voice, like you said before, and you guys have all these things. And I in your response to Andy Roddick on Twitter, you list out a bunch of the things you just mentioned. So I'd encourage people to go look at that. And I know JP's got the next question, but just quickly I read that it was a not-for-profit Canadian organization, the PTPA. So you mentioned that initial funding, which I believe was from some donors that included Bill Ackman. Is that right?
Yeah, Bill Ackman's personal foundation. Yes.
Right. Okay. So there's some like initial seed money there, if you want to say, but going forward, how does the funding propose to work? Is it just going to be like member kind of like union dues from the players who are part of the PTPA? Sorry.
I think it's hard, and none of those other unions that I rattled off earlier run solely on member dues. So what they do, and what we're trying to emulate, but we wanted to, by raising that money, that initial funding, was to give ourselves a multi-year runway so that people will take us seriously. Business partners, sponsors, but also the tours, the Grand Slams, right? And to make the point that we've made, that we exist. I think that's the best way to kind of, we exist, and we're not going anywhere, right?
Yeah.
So we can either engage and try to work on these issues productively, or we can keep, firing off tweets at each other and calling people out, or calling, late night matches out. Or just today, right before I got on, we were dealing with a player flagging an issue with a tournament in Vegas, right? A challenger tournament. And the fact that it's 100, I think it was like 104 degrees or something out there today, and not ideal weather for tennis. I don't play often, but I know enough to know that, and not ideal for any sport, right? And so bringing in our medical director, bringing in, the fact that other tours, other tournaments have those kinds of rules. How do we change that, right? And so existing is and making it known we're not going anywhere is absolutely the first critical step, right? And so long term though, dues, I just, if you do the math, there's not enough players to really, right? Like, so it can't be about dues. I think what it has to be is what other players associations have done, is these group commercial programs, trading cards, video games, that a small, and I do mean small, percentage of that be allocated to funding their players association that is there when they need it, right? I mean, we always talked about it in the NFL and NBA context. There's 10% of the players who are like leaders, right? They care about everything. They read everything you send them. Then there's 80% that are going to care when they need it, right? Because they got suspended or booted or something happens, right? Bad. And they need help, and we're there, and they know we're there. And then there's going to be 10%, and there always is, who are going to be the naysayers. And, well, you haven't done enough. You're doing too much, too drastic. And I've seen, and this is part of the reason why I think engagement is so important, not just in this work, but I've seen plenty of players start in one camp and migrate to another. And the most common migration is from the 10% who don't care to the 10% who are player leaders. And so that, I just think it's a really interesting, again, over 15 years of doing this across different sports, I've seen that. And so I think we have an opportunity to do something similar and again, emulate. And these organizations that I keep citing, they're 50, 60, 70 years old. Now, I'm not saying wait that long, and I ain't going to be doing this that long. And we have shortcuts now because we can learn the lessons that they have learned the hard way, right? And we don't need to make the same mistakes. But again, tennis is different. They're not employees. I can't walk around and say, sign this union card, and then boom, we're a labor union like the UAW or the NFLPA or the NBPA, and we can force the leagues and the owners to collectively bargain over all these issues. We can't do that under the current structure.
Yeah, I feel
Right.
like it was a bit of a cheap shot maybe from a guy like Andy Roddick, who we love on the show, but like he knows how tennis works. I've been in tennis for 8 years. It's impossible to work with the federations and these big organizations. Nothing happens fast, I think is your point. And in general, nothing really happens of substance happens that fast. So I feel JP, I think, has the next question lined up.
Yeah. And before I get to that, it's, working with the NFLPA, like that's one of the largest sports organizations. And we hear stories all the time from other NFL players that like when the NFLPA comes into the locker room, half that room's not listening.
That's
and
right.
They're missing out on all these opportunities. So I can't imagine bringing it into a new sport that has never had it, what it's like trying to get the ball rolling. If these NFL guys, Steven, the NFL dudes, there's like this thing called line of duty that if they apply for it, they can get like however many thousands of dollars a month, but half of them just don't even apply for it because it's like not what their NFL check was. They're like, I'll do it later. And then it runs out.
Yeah.
So it's crazy. But
that is crazy.
Luckily, the PTPA does have some buy-in from a big player. And I was just curious, how did it come about with Novak and Vasek? How were those two the guys that kind of became the faces for the players?
Yeah, and I met them 2 years into or more into their work, and I can safely say this. I've directly interacted, negotiated with executive committee members from the NFLPA, the NBA Players Association, the MLB Players Association, the WNBA player, all of them directly with the athletes, the player leaders. And I've never met two like Novak and Vasek, period. Right. And I'm not just saying that because they tried with the player councils. They had this vision of creating a players association, and then to no benefit of their own, right? Like Vasek's 34, 35, right? Which is still young in my book, but in pro sports and in tennis, that's not young. Novak, there's been plenty of ink spilled about how old he is and how amazing, he can still play at level, that he can still play the sport of tennis across the globe. And they all had people telling them, why are you doing this? Friends, I don't know about family, but business partners, like, this is just a distraction, right? Like, why are you doing this? And they wanted to do this for the rest of the players, really, because they're not seeing any benefit from it, right? I mean, it takes time. We had a dinner meeting the Thursday before the US Open started, right? And it was 2.5 hours with I kid you not, guys. It was a very nice restaurant, windowless room with a screen on
private room.
Yeah, private room with a screen on one wall and a projector with a PowerPoint that was probably 30 slides. And it was like a full discuss. I mean, these are real. This is not, like, and again, they're Hans Jabour's there and Bethany, and like, I mean, this is like a real thing. Hubie Hurkacz is there, and we're all talking through and strategizing and figuring out how we can actually do this and build it. And so their perspective is just so valuable and interesting to me, and it is really selfless. I mean, I'm in it. I'm putting my name on it, but it's part of my work. It's my day job. It is literally taking time away from their day job, and I have all the respect in the world for it.
Yeah. Who picked up the tab on that dinner? Was it Novak?
Well, no, I had to leave early, so he might have. But no, the PTPA picked up the tab. We
like, I left. I gotta leave early. Forgot my wallet. You guys, I will see later. No, that's great. When those are obviously big names, and you've got a lot of the big names on the men's and women's side, on the PTPA are part of it. Were Federer and Nadal ever approached, and what do you believe their response was to joining the PTPA?
So there's a lot of history there that I know the way because you might have read and heard and seen. So I by the time I was involved, Roger was less than a month away. I mean, Laver Cup 2 years ago, right?
Right.
From retiring. I had the good fortune of being there that night and seeing that in person, and it was, amazing and incredible. But also in weird way, like not the right best send off for one of the best players of all time, right? Like it was just like,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? Like it and it's tennis. That's tennis. And
we've literally said that on this podcast about
right.
that night. Tennis.
Yeah. Because like I mean, and like it was so. Oh, and who's on the other side of the net? The U.S. Open semifinalist Francis Tiafoe, who like had Michelle Obama in his box, and you're like, wait,
Right.
they didn't even know he was playing. Like so, but that aside, I have not engaged with those guys yet. I mean, because Roger's retired now, Rafa's dealing with his own kind of
Right.
towards the end of his career, trying to figure out health and what he's going to play. But we, and I mean this because again, I've seen it, and I've had this conversation with every player on our executive committee, but especially the biggest names. This cannot be your thing. This is for all the players, and they don't need me to tell them that. But I just, just like it like just to make sure we're on the same page, and they know that I know that that's what they intend to do. And so it isn't about any one player. And even the money, I told Bill Ackman, look, we don't want all the funding to come from any one source, because I don't want it to be that person or that entity's thing either. It has to be the players, right? And Bill then made the recommendation that even though it was a funding thing, that he do it through his own personal foundation. And just like the players, I have all the respect in the world for that, right? Like just being able, because again, it's what's right, what's best for the players and really for the sport overall.
And you're right. You're like, it should be about the group, and we're talking about the big names, but I feel like the players who are going to benefit the most are people that most people haven't even heard of, like challenger players, futures players. I've been at futures doing media. Like the level of anxiety in the room is like palpable, because they're not covering their costs going to these tournaments. And will the PTPA be able to trickle down and help players at all levels of the game?
That's the goal for sure. And you're absolutely right that, I'd say like there's kind of a direct correlation or an inverse correlation to the rankings, right? The lower ranked you are, the more you need and can benefit from some of the services. Again, like I get it. A priority pass membership is, I don't know, $500, let's say. Right.
Right.
And to like the top 100 men and women, maybe that's not the biggest deal, although I'm pretty sure a lot of them have signed up for that benefit. But to players lower ranked, that's huge. And by the way, like again, we're talking about the PTPA in isolation. That's the only part that I actually think is unfair. I don't mind anything else. But well, wait a minute. So literally everybody else for 3 decades has done exactly zero in this regard for all the players. And then here we are, and it's like, well, yeah, but that's just $500 or the Toomey luggage. What's that worth? And well, yeah, but again, like. At one of our first meetings, we gave we had food, and then we had like $25 I don't know if they were Chipotle or Uber Eats cards for players to take, and guys were like, this is more than anybody in tennis has done for us to this point, because they were at that level, right? And they were like, this is just so. Again, it isn't like we're not. I mean, I would tell you some of the stuff we're trying to do right now, we should not be doing alone. We should be doing with others. And some of it, frankly, other people should be paying for it, and in other leagues and in other sports, they do. Right. So this isn't about we brand it something PTPA. No. This is how do we best serve the players? And oh, by the way, this is in direct response to play. We didn't just guess. We asked the players, what do you want? What do you need help with? And these were the answers. And one like super underrated one that also came up recently was like photo shoots. Well, a bunch of the women asked for photo shoots, because they were like, well, hey, we don't think we're getting promoted enough or in the right way. And we'd love to have like some marketing assets and pictures and stuff with a professional photographer, but it doesn't make sense for any of us to pay for that on our own. But hey, if you guys could organize something, and like that way we could stack a bunch of players and not have any one player paying for it, and we'll just pay for it. We are. And that was something I was like, I would have never in a million years thought of that. Even though some other players associations have versions of that, I would not have thought of that. It wouldn't have been on my list. But that was like, yes, we should just do that and give you guys these pictures and let you grow your fan base, let you grow your sponsor and marketing portfolio. I mean, it's not just about the on-court stuff. It is also about the off-court stuff.
Yeah, it's crazy you mentioned that because I was late getting into tennis also. In 2019 is when I like really first started getting into it. And it was because Denis Shapovalov was at IMG Academy where I was working at the time. And everybody was like, you need to go take these photos, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, yeah, sure, I'll go do it. He comes up to me after the practice. He's like, hey, would you mind sending me the stuff? I never have any content. And then I go Google him and I'm like, this guy is 19 years old, top 20 in the world. And if he doesn't have any content, what does that mean for everybody else? Like there's a market here that's kind of there. And it just seems so obvious. It's kind of the next question. Was there any like, what was sort of the most like surprising hurdle that you've had to climb, or like just a big learning experience through the process so far where it was sort of like, man, I can't believe this is an issue and like we need to get it fixed?
I don't know about the fixing it, but the most surprising part to me, it is insanely difficult to get more than say 10 tennis players in the same room at the same time because
hard to get
they
them on
all
a podcast too.
because they all have different practice schedules, right? And they all have different, which then cascades, right? Like when are you eating? When are you getting your physio time in? When are you they all have different travel schedules. And again, coming from the sports that I've worked in the past, that was never an issue. Again, they might not pay attention, like you say, when you show up. They may not want to meet with you because for whatever reason, but you'd always get like a critical mass of people together because the team schedule, like it's scripted out and you travel together, you eat together, you practice together, right? And then you can have meetings together. Well, in tennis, everything's so staggered and fragmented, not just like at a high level, but down to we have practice sessions from this time to this time, and you got to sign up for your slot, and then you got to have somebody to hit against, and then you have your coach. And then that means that everybody's got a different here, there, and everywhere. And it's just, and I remember hearing the Netflix guys talk about it, like even to do one of the shows where they had like all of them sitting in the same room, not just being followed around, but kind of getting reactions. It was like they almost weren't able to pull it off, and that's Netflix. Wow. And I was like, okay, I get this.
Yeah, no, it's tough. We've both experienced that. Some of them, they're all independent contractors. That's what the tour and everyone keeps saying. They're all on their own schedule. Just quickly, Ahmad, I guess when Andy Roddick first, put out that tweet, or you saw that, kind of what was your initial reaction, and kind of what was your, did it make you annoyed, or was it you're like, hey, this is good press, and like, let me jump in here, or what did that make you think when he tweeted?
So I didn't, I can't remember if it was late at night or early in the morning, but it was not like normal business hours. My initial reaction was, this is great to honestly even have the conversation. I told players 2 years ago, actually really Australian Open last year, right? Because that was when we really started rolling out stuff. What we did at the US Open 2 years ago was say, hey, we hired this guy, Ahmad, and he has this history with other players associations, and he's going to try to work with us now to really revamp, build up the players, the PTPA, right? And then between August and January, we were like hiring initial people, kind of just getting things set up, building the executive committee, building our principles. We had a lot of discussion about what we're not trying to do. We're not trying to be live tennis. We're not trying to be, right, other things. Well, then what are we trying to be, right? You have to articulate those things. And now we have that, and we borrowed from a lot from the cricketers who kind of had some really good examples of things that they were working on, and we tailored it to tennis. And so we rolled out in Australia of 2023. And I said, guys, the biggest risk is that nobody says anything. Like it's just greeted with, being completely ignored by the players, by the agents, by coaches, right? Everybody that we're trying to interact with, the tours, the slams. And that's why I think it's been really heartening to see that we have gotten engagement. Not great from everybody, right? I'm not pretending here that everything's great and we've got it all figured out. Just give me 2 more months or something. No, but I think that was always the biggest risk. And so when I saw that tweet, I was like, oh man, we're getting somewhere. And especially like it's not just all players now. It's all former players like Andy.
Mhm.
It's all future players who are toiling away somewhere. Like when you met Chapo, JP, like down in Florida, right? Like that it's the guys who are, going to be future players in
Right.
10, 5, 10, 15 years. How do we build something that helps them, no matter where they are in the rankings, and no matter where they come from? And so that is a process. But I think honestly, my initial reaction was not annoyance at all, because the thing I fear the most is silence, right?
Right.
If the players don't
Same with
engage,
podcasters.
yes, exactly. Right. Fair. And one of the metrics we talked about last year at this time is we said, we think we're getting somewhere, because we're seeing that when bad things happen to players, they often reach out.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And like it's in that moment when something bad happens, you get that letter, that email about an anti-doping issue, you get that email or notification about a fine, or you get some tournament entry thing, or we had huge issues in the Asia swing last year, particularly on the WTA side, leading up to the WTA finals, right? And that was a huge, it was a mess, and it was painful, and not more so than for the players who were directly affected, but it was also an opportunity, and it was validation that, like, okay, we're in this mix to try to make things better, and again, we it's up to us to deliver on that. But the fact that, going back where we started, like, pressure is a privilege, expectations are a privilege. If people expected nothing of us, that's actually way worse. And hopefully we'll have that discussion, and people can always have their own opinions. I'm not here to change anybody's minds or anything, but I think there are some facts. We all have to deal with the same facts, and I think just the way tennis is structured and what we're trying to do, and how the existing pre-PTPA system has just not worked and not optimized the sport. It's a top 5 global sport. It should be doing way better than it is.
Yeah, that's, man. Have y'all talked about going on his podcast yet? I know there was the Twitter world. Do y'all have a date locked in? You don't have to share the date, but can we see you?
I don't know. Vashik was setting that up, and but it is getting set up, and I know he's been in touch not only with Andy. I mean, they know each other, right? So Andy directly, but also I think Andy looped in the producers, and then I know John fairly well, Wertheim, who I don't know if he's like an official co-host or is on a lot of the episodes, but so no, I think that's on. I don't know that we have an exact date just yet. Obviously, U.S. Open finishing takes precedence, which is very fair, and we want that focus on the players who just had a great last Grand Slam.
Yeah,
I guess one last question, because we are kind of running out of time here, but this is a big one. So I mean, do your best. I would feel like we're not really talking about the current topic if we didn't talk about Jannik Sinner, the whole issue that's been brought up before the U.S. Open, and then obviously him winning, and the criticism of, again, it's no one really points at anything because they don't know who to point at, but there's the ITIA, there's the ATP, there's the whole process, and I think the loudest thing we've heard is like different rules for different players. Is the PTPA going to be able to help level the playing field for a guy like Jannik Sinner, who sounds like he had the team in place to follow that process there for the benefit of himself, whereas other players like Tara Moore didn't? Is the PTPA going to be able to help that?
Yes, that's the hope. It takes, unfortunately, way more than 2 to tango here. The ITIA is one, the WTA, the ATP. Simona Halep actually tested positive at the U.S. Open, so you've got that, several years ago, and that took 18 months or however long it took to get sorted out. So yes is the short answer. It is complicated because no one single-handedly, and by the way, all of that is subservient to the WADA code, the World Anti-Doping Authority, right? So, which adjudicates across all the sports. I always just try to be really clear about 2 things: role and process. Our role is not to adjudicate. I don't say somebody's guilty or innocent. Like, I used to be a lawyer. That wasn't my job there either, right? Like, I had clients, and then there was a judge or a jury or the government, and depending on what the instance was, and they got to decide, right? And so that's our role, is we represent the players, And then we got to know what the procedures are. And I think that's really where some of this criticism has been fair, because there's not a lot of clarity around exactly how and I'm actually fairly sure that whatever the processes are or were, that they were followed. And I am so there's not like, I'm not a conspiracy theorist by any stretch, but I do think that lack of clarity in and of itself, and then some of the the last thing any of us should want is the week before a Grand Slam that is the topic of conversation rather than the upcoming Grand Slam, right? And so, like, to me, even in an instance like this one where the player thankfully didn't have to deal with any suspension, got to play through, right? You still have this scenario where it comes out the week before the last Grand Slam of the year. It becomes a big topic of conversation. It causes a bunch of players to wonder, well, if that ever happened to me, or it did happen to me, and I feel like I was treated differently, again, whether or not it was true, they feel that way. And there's not an easy kind of rebuttal to that, and there really should be. And so working on that, and we've had meetings with the ITIA throughout the whole year, but post since the start of the U.S. Open, talking about exactly that, right? And how do we make how do we make things more clear? How do we make sure players understand what the processes are, and not feel that, that's where the individualness can rear its head a little bit, where they're like, why are certain things happening to certain people? And how do we, so it's really role and procedures to be able to articulate, look, here's what we're supposed to do, and here's what everybody's supposed to do as part of that procedure.
Got you. I got one last quick one, Steven.
Yeah, let's go. Let's do it.
Number one, tennis needs like a Roger Goodell that everybody can get mad at, just for the fans' sake. They can blow off steam at some sort of Goodell type figure. But the last question is just, who are some of your favorite players that you've been able to collaborate with and get to know? I don't know if you can give us one in particular, maybe a top three, but just some of the fun personalities out there.
Well, the point you made about Roger is so interesting, though, and I am buying some time to think about the answer to your actual question, because whether it's a Roger who like kind of soaks in the booze right during the draft and all that, or an Adam Silver who gets lauded as like, a genius. And I had the really good fortune and frankly blessing of being basically mentored by David Stern after he retired from the NBA. And he told me these stories where he said, look, we weren't on TV. The finals weren't on TV. We were on tape delay when he joined the NBA, right? And to look at the NBA now and to watch the Olympics and what happened there, and it's, these things can change, and they can change much faster than the 80s to now. F1 in North America in particular, right? Big change. Women's sports seemingly across the globe, but especially in North America, huge changes. The NWSL went from teetering on bankruptcy, right, to now having, I don't know what the last team was invested, like it was like 200 million plus value, right? These things can actually change if you work together. And the NWSL is a phenomenal example of the league working with their players association. I'm pretty sure the league would tell you that they would not exist but for the players association, kind of sticking it through and working with them throughout the last few years. Answer your question, officially, I have 3 kids. None of them are my favorite. I'm not supposed to have a favorite. Okay.
Right. It's the youngest.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Don't ever let her watch this. No. And so I do feel kind of that way about all the athletes I've ever worked with. That said, not to completely dodge your question, the level of respect for player leaders is, again, I can't quantify it, right? So we've talked a lot about Novak, talked a lot about Vasek, John Isner, who was there from the beginning and has since retired, Hubie Hurkacz, younger guy. I mean, Hubie will call me randomly out of the blue, like on such a regular basis, and it's just, I love that, right? And then that's just the 4 guys on our executive committee. Ans Jabbour, my parents are from Egypt. They immigrated before I was born to the U.S. I was born in Cincinnati, not far from where they play the Cincinnati Open, which is kind of funny. But I just, these players, Bethany, who's been around and served on the player council for many years. It is, Paula Badosa, who was on our first year executive committee, Sai Zhang, like these player leaders, it's just like, it's amazing, right? Taylor Townsend now, who's like having this renaissance, which is so fun to watch, right? But yeah, I mean, I'm never going to be at a match in a player box because, like, wait a minute, I'm trying to represent both players,
Right.
or all four if it's a doubles match, right? And so I don't have that luxury in the way that like fans do, but again, that's a trade-off I'm very lucky and happy to make because it's my job, right? And I never in a million years would have thought that I'd be able to get to do this for a living. But I'd also, never in a million years would have thought that athletes and players associations and groups of athletes needed something like this, but they really do. And I'd say no more so than in tennis. I mean, really, that I haven't seen a group of athletes that need this kind of support more than tennis.
Fair enough. And interesting comment about the player box. I don't know if that's the same for JP. If any players do want an extra cheer person in their box, he will happily take off his journalist hat and support you.
Gladly.
I think it's fair to say any free honeydews will get him there. But Ahmad, thank you so much for coming on the Slice.
Thank you,
giving
guys.
fans the slice about what's going on with the PTPA. There's a lot of change needed in tennis and a lot of positive things in the works with you guys. So great to hear about it straight from the leader.
Yep.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
You. I could talk to you forever, man.
We'll do it again. Let's do it again soon.
We'll have you on again in a little while when some of these things have happened, and we'll be like, look, what you said happened.
Or if they haven't happened, happy to get on and get grilled about why they haven't happened. It's fair. It's fair.
We won't be so nice next time.
All right.
Okay, cool. Thanks, Ahmad. We'll talk to you later.
Thank you, guys.
Cannot wait to have Ahmad back on the podcast. Hopefully, we did a little after the podcast. Steven and I were talking to him. Maybe Steven floated a little bug out there about Indian Wells next year. So maybe we do a little collab with PTPA. But once again, shout out to Ahmad. Shout out to PTPA. Thanks for coming on the podcast. And now we're about to wrap this episode up with a quick little smasher pass that I added nothing to this week. So this is saying thank you, Steven. This is me publicly apologizing, publicly taking accountability for not adding some in here. But let's get into it.
We got you. Now you didn't get a chance to edit this one, so I got some hot seat questions for you, JP. First one, smash or pass Nick Kyrgios's second serve tweet. Smash or pass?
For the first time in my life with Nick Kyrgios, I'm passing. This to me, and you can push the line very far with me and I let it slide. This to me crossed the line. And what kind of made me even more upset was the follow-up tweet after of people get so upset after one little like tweeter emoji, LOL, too much power. Dog, it's not power, man. Like you have a lot of good characteristics, Nick, and you just let this little kind of petty side take over sometimes and kind of let the Twitter people affect you too much. So please stop letting them. You got a lot of good things about you. Don't let these people bring you down and feed into all this. I'm passing on that tweet. What about you?
Yeah, passing big time. I think that, you can joke about things in a way that, isn't like that. And, to me, that's crossing the line. That's super disrespectful to her and to Yannick and to anyone else. And it's just not like really that funny. And,
Right.
I think like to your point, if you get called on it, it's like really easy to just quickly apologize. Be like, hey, that was way over the line, came off wrong. Sorry about that. And people would respect you. But, it's, that hole just keeps getting dug deeper for the people who don't like him. And that's like some more legit reason for that. So I'm passing on that for sure. Smash or pass, JP, the 2024 US Open as a whole. Was it a good tournament or not? Smash or pass?
You got to smash as an American because the Americans made runs in the men's and women's. And I believe they said this was the highest attended one, over 1 million people.
Yeah.
Shout out Travis Kelce, Pat Mahomes pulling up to the final, and Taylor Swift. She was there as well.
Looking
Swiftie.
like Luigi.
looking like Luigi. And Mahomes also had his phone propped up on his glass. He was watching some football, I think. But I think it's a smash because maybe my highlight fan moment of the tournament was Kevin Hart watching the point and he couldn't see / he was maybe high. And he's just like, because it was so honest. I'm like, dude, this is too classic.
Yeah, I'm sure if you clipped that and sent that to The Rock, I don't know, they would have a great roast session about that. And
Yes.
that's great stuff. Celebrities in attendance. Yeah, smash or pass for me on the tournament as a whole. I would say actually a bit of a pass for me.
Mhm.
I feel like you felt like the players felt the burnout kind of from the season. We saw Djokovic and Alcaraz lose early.
Right.
Obviously, I don't like to see that. I want to see it. I want to see them lose to like a Fritz in the semifinals for Fritz to really beat someone big to get to something like that. And the Sinner cloud, to be honest, about the news that came out right before, put a huge cloud over the tournament and put a huge cloud over his win. I'm not saying that he has any guilt or culpability. I believe he was totally cleared and didn't do anything, but just the way the news broke and the fact that there was all these like haters, it just kind of put a bit of a bummer on the tournament for me in general. It was, I still love the US Open. It's an amazing event. And this year, I just think it had a little bit too much fatigue and cloud over it for it to be like one, if I had to rate all 4 majors, I would have put it as probably the 4th this year.
If I wasn't American, I probably would agree with you.
Well, that's fair enough. 2 Americans made the final. It's a very good tournament from the Americans' perspective.
Yes, sir.
All right. Smash or pass the PTPA as a whole. Is it worthwhile? JP,
you know me, man. I've been smashing the PTPA since day one. I think also because of the understanding that I've gotten to have of the NFLPA and like the NBA PA, just like growing up, I'm used to seeing these headlines. I'm used to seeing the issues that happen with these organizations that when everybody's kind of hating on the PTPA, I'm like, guys, this is not like a new thing at all where things aren't like happening like you want them to, but they're so new and it's clearly needed. I was stoked to see him say that people were calling them after matches, calling them from the challengers. That was dope. So overall smash, it's going to be great for all players, rank 100 through 1000.
Yeah. I've always been like a little bit of a pass on the PTPA, and mainly because growing up as a hockey fan up here in Canada, we had a lockout season in 2007, I believe, when I was a kid. When you're like 9 years old, you're like so excited for the season to roll around. Your dad's like, yeah, the whole season's not happening. You're like,
right.
It's just like, you're just like shocked. And you're like, you can't understand. You're like, why are these guys?
This can't be happening.
So the worst thing ever. So you look forward and you're like, this would be a disaster if it ever ended up there with tennis. Right. So, but, having worked in tennis now for 8 years and been, intimately in the inside of these tournaments and with different federations, I can see why it's needed. So I'm smashing on the PTPA now for sure. As long as it continues to work just for the benefit of the lower ranked players, I think, because to be honest, like Yannick Sinner doesn't need any help. Just made 3.6 mil. He's cool. He's killing it. Carlitos making 46 million a year, including endorsements. He's cool. But a lot of these guys who are the next players, like some of them, unfortunately, like there's been players out there who have quit, who could have made it to be stars because they didn't have funding or they didn't have support. So we don't want to see that happen. That's really how you grow the game. So yeah, I'm a huge smash on the PTPA. And last one, JP, Davis Cup. Canada has had amazing success in the Davis Cup last 2 years. And Davis Cup, Billie Jean King Cup. Canada won the Billie Jean King Cup last year, 2023, and they won the Davis Cup for the first time ever in 2022. Do you like the tournament, smash or pass on the Davis Cup?
Love, smash. Anytime there's a team event, I'm all in. Just like every single sport when they do it. And I guess the only 2 sports would be golf and tennis, but it's always fun when they do it in golf. Always fun when they do it in tennis. Wish there was some other ways to kind of incorporate it into the main tennis like schedule swing to where it was hyped up a little bit more for the fans and more easily to view. So I'm smashing Davis Cup. Would love to see Canada get back in there. Maybe raise the trophy one more time.
Yeah, I'm smashing. It's a historic event. It's honestly one of the most historic things in tennis. And I think it gets covered poorly. Like you can, I mean, if you're connected intimately to the thing and you're watching like to the country and
Right.
your team to the final, but being at like a packed out Davis Cup tie, like in
Dude.
the past, if you look at some of the old ones, like where Nadal's playing like Djokovic, or like, I don't even actually know if they
Yeah.
were playing, but like he's playing and it's like a packed house, and it's like really teams then, because like in normal tennis, it's not teams in the crowd. Like, yeah, obviously a lot of players, like fans, cheered against Djokovic or cheered for this guy or cheered. So there's been partisanship in crowds, but it's fair in the Davis Cup. It's like, oh, we're in Spain, half the crowd is reserved for the France team, and that's really
Right.
cool. So, but the issue with Canada is we win those, and it's like a curse on our players.
I
We won the
know.
Davis Cup in 2022, and I mean the players had already had a pretty bad year in 2022, but then they had a worse year in 2023, and they haven't recovered. So Felix is arguably the best player on the ATP tour when it comes to team events. He wins everything for Canada. He's a stud, and then it's like a superpower from a superhero. It's like drawing
Yeah.
out of him. He like spends it all. You gotta stop showing up to let Gabe Diallo and Alexi Galarneau handle it for Canada.
Right.
They will. So yeah, but
Well,
in general, smashing on the Davis Cup.
love it. I think that's it. I think that's a wrap on the show.
That is a wrap.
Love this episode. It was my first time being a part of a true interview episode. I know we did the live show and had guests on, but I thought
How
it
do you
was
feel your
really
performance
fun.
was? Performance review. How did you do?
Oh, there's always room for improvement. I would give scale of 1 to 10. Maybe I'll give myself a 6.8, 6.8 to a 7.2.
You did great. You know, you make the interview. You make half of being a good interview is making the interviewee smile, and you always make everyone smile,
True.
including myself. So I think you did a great job. Ahmad seems like a great guy.
Yes.
Yeah, and doing some interesting stuff in tennis. And the best thing about that is he seems like a very capable guy who's not
Right.
just there to like collect a check. Like, you know, he's worked for some big organizations. He's done it before, and he definitely seems like the right man for the job. No matter if you like or don't like the PTPA. So yeah, shout out to Ahmad for being on the show. Shout out to you guys for watching. Shout out to Betway for sponsoring. And I think we'll have a little bit of a break after the US Open here to recoup, mentally prepare for the follow-up rest of the year. But I already look forward to next week, JP. You know what they say?
They say that's the slice.
That is the slice. We'll see you guys next time. Thanks, everyone.